What's up everyone? Today I want to share my Path of Exile 2 Dawn of the Hunt Endgame Huntress build. And it's a fully mounted lightning spear build, where you ride around on the Rhoa, just throwing out lightning spears and destroying everything. As we know, lightning spear is pretty much overpowered right now. It's, you know, the most used ability. So you might have seen a lot of this before, but I wanted to share it anyway. This is easily the most fun build I've played so far. You just ride around on the big chicken, throwing out lightning spears, and everything just melts. Tier 15 maps are just a breeze. You just ride through everything, one-shot everything. It's got huge single target damage as well. There's a few skills we've taken to give us really good boss damage, so you'll be able to take on all of the endgame bosses and progress and get all your passive points. And you can take this build really far. I'm sitting on around 120,000 DPS right now on lightning spear, and there are tons of upgrades I can make to my gear. I'm only like level 87, so there's a lot of progress to be made. I don't have all my like skill gems at 5 gem slots, so yeah, there's a long way you can take this. So let's get into it. I'm going to go through, you know, the full build, the gems, the gearing, talk through all of that, but I also want to just talk about like how this build works and where a lot of our damage is coming from. So even if you don't want to play this build specifically, but you want to play some sort of lightning spear, hopefully there's something useful here, or you know, you can pick up something here that you can add to your build and pick up a good chunk of damage. So that's it. Let's get into it. Okay, so first let's talk the gameplay, how it works, how we're generating our frenzy charges, where our damage is coming from, that kind of thing. So basically, if you've never played a mounted Rhoa build, the way this works is the Rhoa doesn't move faster. You don't get like movement speed like a mount, but what does happen is any movement speed that your character has will be inherited by the Rhoa. So if you have, for example, I've got 35% movement speed on my boots, you will have 35% increased movement speed while you're on the Rhoa, which means you'll move really fast. And then as well, anything from your passive tree or from gems or any other way you can get movement speed, when you're doing like a trial of Sekima and you get the hare's foot, which gives you 40% increased movement speed, that all goes onto the Rhoa. So you basically have this really, really high movement speed in combat, which is the main thing. So while enemies are throwing things at you and bosses are doing these mechanics and you've got to move out things on the floor, we're moving at this really fast pace. And then on top of that, if we look at like the combat speed, as you're, you know, you're firing out these lightning spears, we're quite slow. On the back of the Rhoa, we have the full speed. So we don't take a single bit of slowness while we're using our abilities. So that's why we stay fully mounted all the time. When it comes to frenzy charges, we can generate them in two ways. We have the traditional combat frenzy, where whenever you electrocute an enemy, you generate a frenzy charge. And then we have cast on shock. So whenever an enemy gets shocked, we build up this meter of energy. And then when it's full, we apply the mark to something. When an enemy's marked, we can generate charges from it. So that's, you know, that's two ways we generate the frenzy charges. We use those frenzy charges in lightning spear to, you can see there, consumes a frenzy charge if possible to cause the main spear to split into multiple copies and then burst. So it's a massive damage increase. The screen just gets deleted in a second. You can really feel when you pop a frenzy charge, and we generate a lot with this build. So that's frenzy charges. The only other thing to learn about this playstyle is we have a support gem called Vault, and as we ride around, we generate Vaultic charge. And when it hits the max, our lightning spear will chain and deal more damage. So you are encouraged to move around more, and the more you move around, the more damage you do, which is another reason why staying fully mounted, you can see here, we're traveling a lot of distance, this number's going up a lot, and that means we're going to do significantly more damage. So yeah, that's kind of how the build works. In terms of the damage number and where all the damage is coming from, we'll go over that. So we'll start first by talking about the gem setup. Right, as we go through the build, I do have a full build guide if you'd rather use that. It's I've just finished it and it will go live as soon as the video's out. And as you go through that, there's two versions. There's an early end game, which is like, you know, you've just finished the campaign, you don't really have anything, you want like budget gear, that kind of thing, 3 or 4 gem slots each skill. And then there's a final version, tier 15 plus, end game, 5 gem sockets, that kind of thing. So as we go through the gems, as we go through the gear, if you're thinking, how do I get there? I've only got 3 slots and no exaltants. There is an earlier version you can start to adapt into. So that's down there. And if you like the style of build and you find it useful, do consider subscribing to the channel. I make a ton of PoE2 builds and guides. And I also stream if you want to come hang out or ask any questions, or, see these before they're, fully out, as we're playing them. And now let's go through the gems. So let's go first through the main damaging abilities. So the main big damaging ability is Lightning Spear. So on Lightning Spear, we go for Vault. I've already talked about this. It's the one where as you move around, you build up Vaultic charge. As it hits 30 units, it will spread and deal increased damage. So this is absolutely huge. I'm expecting this to get, Omega nerfed in the next big patch, but they said they're not going to nerf anything throughout this patch. So make the use of this one. It is incredible. Then we go for martial tempo for attack speed. We go for lightning infusion to increase our lightning damage. And we go for deliberation for increased damage. The best thing about this is it has 30% move speed penalty while using it, but we don't get that move speed penalty because we're mounted, which is fantastic. And then finally, we go for primal armament. And if you're unsure about any of these, look at the damage decrease when you take it out. You lose about 25, you lose about 20,000, you lose about 20,000, lose about 25,000. So we're really getting a good chunk of damage from all of these. So I would say as you're leveling, as you're progressing through endgame, this should be your #1 focus to start upgrading with your, with your jeweler orbs. You should focus to getting these because every single piece of damage you get will scale massively with Lightning Spear. Okay, our second main attack is Storm Lance here, and Storm Lance is where you throw your lance into the ground and deal damage. So we will mainly use this on bosses. You'll use it to like deal additional damage and like prep the bosses a bit more. And then if you're doing something that's stationary, so like holding a ritual and you're waiting for things to spawn, or some boss rooms or some events where you're just waiting for mobs, this is really good to just, build up that damage while we're riding around and building up our Voltic charge. So on here, we go for Bullseye, 50% more accuracy rating. Huntress and Amazon specifically scales really, really well the more accuracy we have. So it's just a massive damage boost. Blindside, you deal increased damage. Crit Strike, bonus damage against blinded enemies. And we have a way to make them, cause that. Then we go for Persistence for 40% more skill duration. So it will stay in the ground longer and deal more damage over time. And then we have Inspiration, which is 30% less cost. If you are finding you're casting this more manually, you're constantly throwing these out and you don't want that, fine. Similarly, if you find you don't have a mana problem, you don't need that. I personally find these quite mana hungry, especially at the higher levels. So I use it, but yeah, that can be your preference. Now for Barrage, Barrage is our big buff attack, our big buff ability. So when we have 30 units of Voltic charge built up, we got a Frenzy charge, you go for a Barrage and you deal your big damage. That's what like chunks the bosses down. Now on this, it says we throw out multiple projectiles. So it says empowers your next spear attack to repeat multiple times. Consuming a Frenzy charge will give you more of these. So what we do here is we take Premeditation for 15% more damage. We go for Inhibitor, so it does not consume the charges. So this means that when we get a Frenzy charge, it's not getting wasted on a Barrage. It's getting used when we Lightning Spear, which is what we want. Then we can go for Perpetual Charge. So you have a 35% chance not to remove the charge, but you still get a chance to you still get the benefits of consuming them. So we still get the multiple barrages, but we don't use the charge. And then we combine that with benefits from consuming charges, have 20% chance to be doubled. Now, I'm pretty sure it works this way. Correct me if I'm wrong. What this means is we use no frenzy charges on barrage, but we have multiple chances to get additional barrages at the same time. So it's a win-win. If you've tested this and you don't think it works like that, do let me know. Next up, Infused Weapon. So that isn't a skill gem, but if you go into your Ascendancy on Amazon, you have this here, Infused Weapon. When you consume a Frenzy charge, gain 2 Lightning Infusions, which is just another source of lightning damage. Now, you can have this in your gem setup and you can add support gems to it. So we go for Long Shot for 30% more damage. We go from 30% more damage when far away. We go for Lightning Exposure, so we apply Lightning Exposure for 8 seconds. We go for Elemental Focus for 25% more damage. And then we go for Blind. Now, the reason we blind is so that when we use Storm Lance, it triggers the blind, which is really, really good. So that's like all our damage. That's where pretty much all our damage is coming from in our active abilities. Now let's talk about the, well, what would you call them? Persistent buffs. As you build out this build, you can have more and more persistent buffs. You can have more and more spirit. And you can see here, I've got 200 and my gear's like, okay, it could be a lot better. You could probably get up to 250, pushing 300 if you really went for it. So you could get a lot more spirit and add even more. You could add like a companion if you wanted to, things like that. But I'll go through the order at which you want them. Number 1, you want Combat Frenzy. This is how you generate your frenzy charges from electrocuting enemies. You go for Profusion, 25% chance to grant an additional charge, and you go for Clarity for 30% mana regen in there. Then you go for the Herald of Thunder. That'll be your second one. Heralds are just, amazing for clearing, amazing for like AoE damage. We take Electrocute, so they cannot inflict shock, but they contribute to electrocution buildup. We combine that with Neural Overload, so that Electrocute is primed. Electrocute would trigger on primed enemies. So basically, as an enemy's health gets lower, you will trigger the Electrocute early. So you can see here, Electrocute will happen when an enemy hits 40%, On magic enemies, it's 50, rare 60, and unique 70. So you're going to trigger that electrocute earlier, which means you're going to get your combat frenzy earlier, and your frenzy charges, you know, the cycle will start earlier, more damage. Then we go for magnified effect, so it goes off in a bigger area. And finally, innovate, 35% of damage when you defeat a shocked enemy. Okay. And I'm going through these in the priority that I would be like building these out. Once you have enough spirit, you can add in your mount. So you get 100 from the campaign, and you probably need like 60, 30, 30 for all of these. So 120 maybe. With the Rhoa mount, you don't really need any support gems, but you can go for loyalty, so it takes 10% of the damage for you, and then you can go for precision, so you have a accuracy increase while you're on your mount or while the mount is active. And then finally, as you fully build out, you know, the end game version of this, and you have extra spirit, you can get cast on shock. Now, before you get cast on shock, the thing cast on shock is doing is, as we shock enemies, we fill up a meter. When it's full, like this is the meter here, when we generate enough shocks, we will trigger the ability socketed inside, which is the mark. The mark will mark an enemy. Whenever we crit an enemy, we gain a frenzy charge. That's the combo. We combine that with impetus for 40% increased energy and energy retention, so that skills triggered have 35% chance to refund their energy cost. Long story short, it's a way of casting the mark without doing anything. You just ride around, shocking enemies, and you automatically mark enemies, which automatically generates your frenzy charges. Before you have enough spirit to cast this, you can just manually apply the mark. Especially on bosses, you'll be doing that regularly to increase your damage and increase your frenzy charges. But there's just a way to fully automate that, which is really helpful. Yeah, that's kind of all the gems pretty much. I'm still trying to, get more of the perfect jeweler's orbs, and we'll add more, and I'll update the guide with like a, giga endgame version as we have it. But yeah, this is where we are so far. The damage is really good. Okay, now let's talk about gear, because this is where a lot of our damage is coming from. So I'll go through it piece by piece. On the gearing, on the full build guide, I've got an early game, end game version, and this is pushing, we push the budget a bit harder in the full end game version, and I'll show you what you can work up to this with. So on the boots, 35% movement speed. The number one thing you want to get is movement speed. This is the main, the beauty of this is we have this amazing movement speed while fighting mobs and fighting bosses. So don't sell yourself short. Get 35% movement speed on your boots as a priority, and then just try and pick up some evasion, dex, that kind of thing. Then on the chest piece, you want to be looking for something with spirit. So spirit here, I've got 55 spirit here. You want to look for something with spirit. Now, you can get, there's like a strength dex jacket that has that, and there's also dex int jackets that have this, like the sleek jacket. You want the spirit. The spirit is how we push, the Rhoa, the herald, the cast on shock, all of these different things at once. So you want to pick up as much spirit as possible. On top of the spirit, try and go for as much life as possible. This is a fairly squishy build, so try and get a good life roll. This is a rank 10. Try and get as much life as possible. And then try and get some evasion, energy shield, because we have a lot of uniques. So because we've got so many uniques, we don't have much to play with. To try and get some added defenses, and then try and get some resistances. On your rings, you want to be going for as much damage as possible and as much resistance as possible. Like I say, we don't have many sources of non-unique items to try and pick up your resistances. I've got double fire resistance on the rubies, and then I've got all elemental resistances on both, which is a big all-around resistance increase. Okay, and then again on the rings, you want to be looking for damage. So physical damage to attacks, lightning damage to attacks, really, really good. If I show you my damage now, 120,000 DPS. If we take off a ring, we drop, 15,000 damage. So significant. So try and get those damages. They can scale quite high as well if you are lucky enough to find them, or you can afford some good ones. And then the only other thing is the belt, HP, resistances. The main reason it's so important to get these resistances and these defensives is because that's pretty much the only flex you have. Everything else is a legendary, is a unique. So we're locked in. The next thing we go is the amulet. So on the amulet, you want the beacon of Aziz. Now this gives 30 spirit and then 50 spirit implicit. That can roll, high roll lower. The main thing we want there is the spirit, 45 spirit. But then critical hits, ignore elemental resistances is fantastic. So that's a really good neck. Now let's talk about the end game juicy combo. Now this is huge damage increase. This is like, I'm talking like 40% of our damage. This is a massive amount of damage. It's from the helmet and the focus combo. So on the focus, you go for the woven, for the threaded light woven focus. Now, ignore everything. The only thing we care about here is 12% increased spell damage per 10 spirit. So this is a spirit heavy build. You know, we have 200 to 300 spirit, which means for every 10 spirit, we're gaining 12% spell damage. Why do we want spell damage? We don't deal spell damage. We don't deal spell attacks. That's where the helmet comes in. On the helmet, we have increases and reductions to spell damage also apply to attacks. So basically, 12% increased spell damage per 10 spirit. So 200 spirit, that's like what? 240% spell damage. That turns to attack. So that's 240% attack damage, which is absolutely incredible. But the main reason this is so good is because then we can take any spell damage increases in the passive tree, like this cluster right here, the spell blade, 32% increased spell damage, 12% increased spell damage, 12%. All of these spell damage increases give us increases to our physical attack. So this ramps your damage so much. So try and get these as fast as possible. I will say, if you're early end game and you want a budget option, I would grab the Kitoko's jeweled gloves. That's a really early budget glove. It helps you electrocute things earlier when you don't have like the cast on shock setup. That's really nice. And then I'd go for the Rampart Tower Shield, this thing. This doubles your accuracy rating. So this is a massive damage boost early on. These two things are fairly affordable. You can get these quite cheap. They were when I got them. Hopefully they still are. I'd grab these quite early on, and that'll be fine. But once you can upgrade to this combo, you'll do a lot better. Now I'm using the Hands of Wisdom in action. These are okay. Like these are okay, but I've got a lot of raw stats, so this is giving me a good damage increase. If you don't, just go for standard gloves. Just go for standard gloves with like physical, like increases to attack and extra stats on them. On the weapon, this is your next big source of damage. Now, the things you're looking for here is the weapon is a trap, right? The weapon is a bit of a trap. So if I show you a weapon with really high physical damage, if I have one. Okay, here we go. So it's very easy to just look for a spear with very high physical damage. You can see here, this is my old spear, and it has 310 physical damage. The one I'm using right now has 118. So it sounds like, you know, you would just throw that away. That's a terrible roll. It's only got a 97%. This one's got 156. But if we look at the damage, 120,000, we drop down to 97 when we put this big damage spear on. So a big spear with big attack is a bit of a trap. So here's what you want instead. You want to be looking for a sea glass spear. A sea glass spear has a implicit crit chance of 10%, whereas the other spears are like 5 to 7, that kind of thing. A sea glass has 10. And the main source of our damage is accuracy, crit chance, and crit attack, which when you look in the Ascendancies, you'll see why, but it's basically here. If we go down this tree here, chance to hit with attacks can exceed 100, and you gain crit chance the more accuracy you have, the more crit chance you have. And then here, any accuracy on your weapon will be added to the physical damage. So we're trying to build out physical damage and we're trying to build out crit chance and crit bonus damage. So you can see here, the crit chance is 35%, and this is increased from our Ascendancies massively. So we're having this huge crit chance, and then when we do crit, which is very, very often, we're hitting for 475% damage. That's where our damage is coming from. Having a high roll on physical damage doesn't make up for that. And then obviously, you know, the other things on there, accuracy, fantastic. Levels to projectile skills is a big win. Attack speed is not so important, but it's good. The gem, you want to make sure you put the accuracy rating in, not the physical damage, because again, 25% of your accuracy rating turns into physical damage. So you're going to get 110 times 25% is more than you would get from just a physical damage gem, like an iron gem. So yeah, that's the gear. I know that's been a bit of a long ramble, but a lot of this number comes from your gear, and you don't need to, you know, break the bank. You don't need to like really be spending like 10 divines. You can, you know, like I say, this is a much worse spear. This was like a 1 divine spear, and you can see you're still at 100k. So, you know, you don't need crazy gear for this, but if you get crazy gear, the numbers go even higher. Okay, finally, the passive tree and the Ascendancies. So if we go into here, first we'll start with the Ascendancies. We're showing this massive damage and all these, you know, all these clips. I haven't even gone and done my 4th Ascendancy yet because I totally forgot. But yeah, this is all on 3 Ascendancies, which is amazing. But basically what you want to do, infuse weapon first, start putting your support gems into that. Then I would go down into critical strike, chance to hit with attacks increase 100. And then all of your accuracy will start feeding into your crit chance, which is really good. And then I would go down this tree here, which is, it gives you 50% increased damage depending on the health of the boss. So as you're fighting bosses and, you know, unique enemies, there will be certain parts of the health bar. When you hit them, you'll deal 50% more damage. This is a really good boost while you're at endgame. Once you have a spear with really good accuracy, I would take out of there and put into here. And then when you get your 4th Ascendancy, I'd go back into here. That's how I would play it. Obviously, going to be gear dependent. If you have a really good spear with really good accuracy early on, just play it like this. 4th Ascendancy into there. Okay. Now on the tree itself, I'm gonna go through this because I've fully mapped this all out in the build guide. So I won't go into too much detail, but I'll show you the route. We travel down here. We skip this little cluster here to save on points. We go down here. You just take whatever you can, whatever you need for your gear. We're quite spread among like int, strength, and dex to hit certain spells and certain gear. So just hit whatever you need here. Take strength or int if you need them. We take this cluster here for accuracy. We take this cluster here for crit damage and crit strike chance. We take this here for elemental damage. We curl to the bottom and we take this cluster here for accuracy and increased attack speed per accuracy. And then we take this entire spear cluster here for increased damage with spears. Okay, that's step 1. That's the first thing you should be working on, just hitting this entire cluster, this entire path. Then I would come along here. I would branch off from where the gem socket is, and I would come up to here. I'd get this dex and attack speed cluster, and you get more attack speed the more dex you have. I would come along here and get the added dex. I'd grab this node here for increased evasion and increased dex, and then this entire crit cluster, this crit chance, all this crit cluster. Basically, you see crit is good. Then I would start branching along here to like the start of this section. You're going to come to here. You got movement speed here. You would wrap up and around. You would come up here for these crit nodes, and you would get this crit cluster here. You'd come along here for this evasion and energy shield cluster. I didn't go into here personally, but you can if you want. Then I would come up and grab the Spellblade cluster, which is it's like 50, 60 something, 70% spell damage, which turns into 70% physical attack damage for us, which is incredible. Gem slot. And then I would come up to here for this big crit cluster. That's how I would run it. That's how I would go into it. I'm not going to hover over every single node and go 12, 10, 12, 10, 15. You can go over the nodes. That's how I would go. The gems, you know, you probably already know. Crit chance, crit damage, increased damage with spears, attack speed with spears, anything like that. Crit chance, crit damage. We can also take spell damage now, which is really good on these blue gems because that's where our crit is as well. Yeah, that's yeah, we can get crit on blue gems and you can also get spell damage, so that's good because that turns to attack damage. But yeah, that's everything. I don't think there's anything else to talk about. I think that's the entire build. If you've got any questions though, let me know in the comments. Like I say, I also stream, so if you want to come and ask anything while we're playing, that's probably faster. But I do try and answer any comments if you have any specific questions on this as I see them. But that's it. That's everything. This has been a long one, and I took a long time to get this out because I wanted to fully test it. I wanted to I wanted to make sure it could defeat the endgame bosses. I want to make sure it could defeat tier 15 maps. And I've been trying a lot of things. I've been getting one shot a lot, testing different things, struggling on bosses to make sure I can find the build and the setup that does work. And this does work. This is like final. I'm not going to update this. I might make an added one like later on with like Giga Juice gear, but this will take you everywhere. So thank you for watching. Take care. Subscribe if you like the video, and I'll catch you on the next one.